Hi, welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. A couple of weeks ago, I was sharing with you how I was making two quilts out of one. I was paper piecing these wonderful square and a square blocks from a pattern. It was the Miss Rosie's floral quilt pattern. This was a UFO I'd started many, many years ago. So I was paper piecing these blocks, but as I would paper piece each block, I would end up with these leftover wacky half square triangles. And I'm going to share with you today how you can make a wacky crumb block. I'm going to show you how you can put it together so that the crumb block is tilted in the square. This ends up being, I believe it's a 15-inch square, and I'll remeasure that here in a minute. But it was a really fun block to make, and it's so very simple. So let me show you how it's done. So with every paper pieced block that I produced, I had all of these little wacky triangles. And with those, I simply paired them all together and made some wacky looking, let me put it on white here so you can see it better. I made some wacky looking half square triangles. They're just all different sizes and shapes, and I am going to piece them together to make a large block. You can make your blocks any size you want. And I'm just going to show you a simple way of how I first of all put this all together to make the inside of the crumb block. And then I'm going to show you how I cut these with the fabric strips from the white, and you can use any fabric you want, and set the block on a tilt, and it creates a wacky looking block. So let's see how this is done. So the first thing you want to do is find pairs that will go together that are similar in size. And so that's what I've done here. And you can put them together so that they look like they're flying geese units, or you can put them together in diagonal rows, however you choose to put these together. I could put them together like that, or keep them all as half square triangles. But I'm gonna pair them up. I'm gonna find pairs, and then I'll just continue sewing the pairs together until I have a block that's whatever size you'd like it to be. In my case, I want it to be, I believe it's a 12.5 by 12.5 inch block for the center of this wacky block that we're making. So as you can see, I'm just starting to sew these in pairs. It's really mindless work. It's something that you can do while you're watching television, listening to music, listening to a book. But I'm simply going to be sewing all of these together. I'll continue doing that, and then I'm going to continue making a square block. So I'll end up sewing these in rows. Here are the first two that I've sewn together in units. So I put these together in a unit of 4. I put these together in a unit like that. And I'll probably continue sewing these together and adding some to the side. I just want to continue making the square larger and larger so that it will end up being at least 12.5 inches. Once I have everything pressed, I'm going to square them up to 12.5 inches. You'll notice here that none of my seam allowances match. I'm not worried about that. This is really, really wonky, so very easy. Everything is just crazy, and just stitch it as you want. It's just a lot of fun to do crumb quilting. I've finished my block, so it is all stitched together, and I've pressed it. You'll notice that none of the seams match, and that's okay. I have a little guy at the top there that I'll have to trim away. My blocks, I am squaring up to 12.5 inches, and I happen to have a 12.5 inch ruler. which I can put right in the middle there or toward the edge, and I can trim around there, and I'll have a perfect 12.5-inch square that I will use for the center of my Wacky block. So let me get this cut out, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to cut our Wacky pieces to create a tilted block. I've grabbed a gray mat here so you could see my white fabric. I decided to cut my fabrics in with the fabric strips by 5 inches wide. So they're 5 inches wide, and my block is 12.5 inches. So what I'll need to do is put 2 of these together. And this white fabric, there's not a right side or a wrong side. Either side is right or wrong. But what I'll do then is trim this up to 12.5 inches so that 2 of these match opposite sides of the block. And then I'm going to create a diagonal on there, and I'll cut that in a moment. Let me first get this cut to 12.5 inches. So every one of these Wacky borders is going to be a little bit different. It's all going to be very unique. So I have 2 of these put together, and I will end up creating 4 Wacky borders, which will go on 2 12.5-inch sides. The white is 12.5 inches long by 5 wide. And I'm simply going to, in fact, I need to get a longer ruler, but I'm going to allow myself 1 inch to 1.5 inches down here, and the same amount at the top there, 1 inch to 1.5 inches there. And I'm going to cut that off, and then I will sew these 2 pieces together. Let me get a longer ruler to cut that, and I'll be right back. Hopefully you can see the whole length of it now. So I'm basically creating some diagonals here, and I'm going to go ahead and cut. I've left about 1 inch to a little over 1 inch there and a little over 1 inch there. And I'm simply going to cut. So I've laid these 2 pieces. They're the same piece. I've just flipped them opposite. So I have the short end up here, the longer end down here. And for this one, I've got the longer end up here and the shorter end down here. And we are going to stitch them to each side, opposite sides of this block, and press them. I like to press mine out toward the fabric. And then we're going to take an additional 5-inch wide with the fabric strip, and we're going to cut long strips that will fit the rest of this block, and it's going to be longer than 12.5 inches. I believe it's going to be 17 or 18 inches that we'll be cutting. One thing to keep in mind when you are attaching your little triangle pieces, I guess I'll call them, make sure that the straight of grain is attached to the quilt or the block itself. The outside edge is the bias edge, and you do need to attach it that way so that the square remains square. So that's very important to do that. So I'm going to stitch these together on the opposite sides, and this is 12.5 inches long. It was 5 inches wide, but I cut it at a diagonal, and I created 2 wonky little triangles that I'm going to attach to this block right here. Then I'm going to press it open, and I'm going to take the 5-inch with the fabric strips, and I'm going to measure what this 2 sides should be subcut as. I think it's going to be about 16.5 inches. We'll see when I get back with this. I've attached these 2 pieces and pressed them toward the outside, and as you look from here to there, it's 16.5 inches. So I am going to, in fact, I believe I already have cut a 16.5-inch long strip, and I've cut it on the diagonal. And again, I'm attaching the straight of grain to the straight of grain of the block. This outer edge here is the diagonal. We are going to stay stitch the entire outside edge of this block to secure it. But that will go together like that. I'm going to press it or turn it over here and stitch it. I'm going to do the same to the other side. And so put the straight of grain up against the block, and I've cut this 5-inch diagonal piece to be 16.5 inches long. And I'll lay that right there and stitch this side, and we'll stitch this side, and I'll bring it back to the table. My crumb block, which was 12.5 inches, is now tucked inside of these wacky triangle borders, and it makes the block sit it's cattywampus, or it's on a tilt within the block. And then make sure that you square up the entire block so that it's completely square. Mine are being squared up to 16.5 inches is what I'm doing at this point. So, but you can make these blocks any size you want. You don't have to make as large of a crumb block. You can make them smaller, but I think this is going to go together very quickly. As you saw, piecing this little center section here only took about 10 minutes, so it doesn't take long to piece together a very large 12.5-inch crumb quilt block. And then putting the border on is really simple. Just decide how wide you want your width of fabric strips. Mine started out at 5 inches wide, and then I cut them on the diagonal. And that just allowed this block enough room to be able to tilt. If you have a smaller block, maybe you only want a 3-inch wide width of fabric strip from which you're going to cut your little wacky triangles there. But it's a very simple, fast way to make a quilt, and I can't wait to get this pieced. It is fun to be able to piece together 2 different quilts at one time, my paper pieced quilt as well as this crumb quilt. Thank you so much for joining me today as we created this very quick, wacky block here using crumbs and some width of fabric strips to create an unusual border. It tilted each and every one of our blocks, and you can have every block within your quilt tilted in a different direction. Have fun with it. I'd love to see pictures of your quilts. Please don't forget to post them out on my Facebook group page, Quilting with Lori, and then it's Scrap Up Your Stash. I'll have a link below in the description box so that you can easily find that link and post pictures of your fun crumb quilt blocks. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, happy quilting.